Wonderful. So this topic seemed to be one that was super simple, but then not so simple because I tried to think about what my self-care looks like in this new space that I am in. And that's why it prompted um, this topic is, okay, what does my self-care look like um, now that my husband and I are married? We are starting a family. What does that look like? Processes have changed. If I know that I haven't disclosed any of my background to most of you or all of you, but my husband and I didn't live together previously to us getting married. So this is very much a system, a relationship, a way of doing things that neither of us have been exposed to before. And it's the way that we chose to do things. And so with all of that, there's just a lot of changes that came up very, very quickly. Basically everything in terms of how we do things, why we do things, what they are have changed. And so with that, I learned very quickly that my time is no longer my own. I have to now carve out a lot of time if I'm going to be looking at taking care of self. So this is kind of why this topic came up for me. So I want to start with, let's see, let me go. Okay, perfect. The biggest takeaway from my slides, if you are going to ask, is caring for yourself as a part of caring for your clients. Okay. It is our responsibility, and even more so, it is, at least in my code of ethics, an ethical obligation slash duty that I have to adhere to. I'm sure that you as psychologists and other professionals have a similar code of ethics in terms of self-care, or at least it being a part of the work that you do. Okay, so what is self-care? I think all of us know what this is, but I'm going to go through it real quick. These are actions or practices that help us to maintain our effective functioning and promote our wellness. Self-care requires awareness of one's experience and balance, and this is what I really want to talk about. This is going to be another major theme. Self-care is a skill that should be integrative, lifelong commitment. One of the biggest things that I have learned from Dr. C is self-care should be proactive and not reactive. It's not a, oh shoot, I'm burning out. No, it's a, let's do this so that you don't burn out. And I think that's really changed my view on what self-care is, and why I need it and why I develop it and why I cultivate it. And so me sitting down in this new space that I'm in, I'm like, oh shoot, I need to develop, or at least start thinking about what self-care will look like now that my role has changed personally. Um, Self-care and self-stewardship. I know that many of you may not have heard self-stewardship. It's technically not a therapy term. It is a term that my own therapist and I talked about many, many, many times when we talked about self-care. And there is a difference between the two. I think, this is a personal opinion, they must go hand in hand. We can't practice self-care without self-stewardship. And I'm going to quickly explain the way that I define self-stewardship, and you can certainly do a quick Google search of what self-stewardship is to educate yourself a little bit more. But self-stewardship is the things that a person does in order for their life to run smoothly, right? And if we neglect to do those things, then well, actually, the first thing that goes is self-care. So if you neglect to, for example, grocery shop, if you neglect to meal prep, if you neglect to do your laundry, the end result is, oh, I'm eating out more. I am frustrated running around not knowing what to wear, right? I don't have systems in place to help me cultivate and grow and keep my life on track. And so what this means is I have to take a really hard look at the systems that I have in place and if they're working or not. Because if I am engaging in self-care, for example, doing, I don't know, getting a pedicure, but my fridge is absolutely empty. Um, is it hurtful? I think it is. Is it, can I say that self-care shouldn't be done? No. But at the same time, I think we need to take these two concepts and use them hand in hand so that we are or more successful, I should say, and that it doesn't feel like self-care is a to-do list or vice versa. We don't feel guilty or feel less guilt for taking care of ourselves because we haven't or failed to steward ourselves appropriately. So, um, again, I think that these two concepts go hand in hand, and how you self-steward can also be a way of self-care. So, for example, some people use working out, right, as a part of their self-care routine. It could also be a part of self-stewardship, right? If you do not move your body, if you do not take care of your body, it will not take care of you later. So that's kind of how those concepts go hand in hand. Okay, why self-care is essential. Prevents burnout and compassion fatigue. This is the very first one for me to go. I feel very irritable when I notice that I'm starting to kind of dread even seeing my favorite clients. I know I've gone too far. Like, I need to take a really hard look at where I am. Um, and that's the biggest one for myself. Some people have headaches, other people have a hard time sleeping. It just depends on who you are. Um, Self-care is essential to maintain empathy. This is another huge one that goes when I feel very irritated or more frustrated with my clients because of a lack of progress. That's saying a lot. That's saying that I am losing the empathetic touch. Okay, why am I losing that? Usually indicates that I am not practicing enough self-care. Protects client safety and judgment. So along with being effective as a therapist in the room, if you're not empathetic, then we are more prone to doing harmful things to and with our clients. So something to look out for. A big one, and this is the proactive versus reactive type of self-care, is we want to support career longevity. So if you want to have career longevity as a therapist, um, having a proactive self-care plan, I think, is absolutely crucial. And of course, it models healthy coping for clients, right? If we don't say, oh, I'm doing this as a self-care, or I am taking some time, or I am doing this, even just it could be, the first couple minutes of small talk that you have with a client in a session, and you start with the how are yous. I like to use this as a self-disclosure just a little bit, and also modeling some healthy coping or some self-care that I engaged in over the weekend or the week, just so that my clients know that, hey, look, this is actually something that I also do and not just preach. Okay, common challenges. Again, very quickly, I'm going to go through this. Compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma. We sometimes over-identify with clients. The biggest one for me is the heavy workload / paperwork and the admin type stuff. I can very quickly put away what happened in session, even if it was hard. What I tend to personally struggle with is the admin stuff. It could look different for everybody else. I know myself enough to know that if I created a CPS report in the middle of the day, I usually will be okay by the next day. It's something that I work through quite quickly, but the never-ending amount of case notes seem to be more daunting most times than any CPS report that I will have to create. So that is something I know about myself. Could look very different for other counselors. Okay, so self-care is the balance in each or of each of these areas, right? And when we think of self-care, we always think of either physical self-care or emotional self-care, but self-care can reach very different, like there's different categories of self-care, and we will get into those. Um, so emotional, physical, spiritual, and relational. Okay. I think it's important to have a working um, list of your self-care in each of these categories so that you know which piece of self-care or what kind of self-care to do every single day or every single week. Because you might be physically tired, but you might feel very creative, or you might be just burnt out on relationships. I don't know, holidays and stuff like that, but you might need some, and you might need some physical rest, right? So it's also important to know in which category or what category of self-care that we need at each time. Okay, what self-care is not? Something to start practicing after you notice difficulties. Again, proactive versus reactive. Self-care does not have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be all-day retreats. It doesn't have to be monthly pedicures and massages, although wonderful as they are. Um, they don't have to be done in isolation. I often thought self-care is just isolation, me spending time with myself. Mm, it depends on who you are. Uh, Introvert versus extrovert, I think, has a very important role in how you do self-care. And certainly, I hope that self-care is not an ever-ending to-do list or an item on your to-do list. However, I think this is where the self-stewardship piece comes in. And I would say that sometimes I need someone, whether a friend or my partner, to say, when was the last time you sat down? Or when was the last time you watched a movie? Or let's plan on doing this. So I definitely use other people to also gauge where I am at. So this is something that other people can help you with too. Okay, we kind of touched on this. Warning signs of neglecting self-care, irritability, difficulty maintaining boundaries. Personally, for me, the way that this shows up is I tend to actually not have difficulty maintaining boundaries, but more so being irritable and snappy with people, which often translates to very rigid boundaries for at least myself. Um, this can look very different for other counselors. So
Yes,
physical
I would say
symptoms,
isolation is one of them.
yes,
Uh, a feeling of
yes,
tiredness, this fatigue that you mentioned,
yes.
is often part of it. Uh, various somatic symptoms can be a part of burnout as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
yeah,
For me, it's fatigue. Sometimes I get really stiff in the hips. I see a chiropractor for that, a part of my self-care. Um, yeah, if I sit for too long, I know that I'm not moving enough. And I now need to insert or find time to see a chiropractor, which actually, after every single time I do so, feels so much relieved and better. So that is a part of self-care for me. Okay, here is where we get into development of self-care. I think the very first thing to look at is just being aware of what you need and how you would like to implement self-care. So, for example, if I am a social butterfly, right, my self-care will look probably a little bit different from somebody who is more introverted. Um, Not that we don't need interaction, but sometimes I find it more appealing to crochet than to sit in a book club for an evening. I don't find that, sitting and chatting about a book is a type or form of self-care. It's just another thing that I have to do. Um, So being aware of emotions and reactions, being honest about what your needs are, knowing what your warning signs are is super important. Um, Knowing what is working. Is it relaxing? Is it rejuvenating? Personally, I don't like pedicures. I don't like people touching my feet. I don't find that to be relaxing. Do I get pedicures? Heck yes. I, for the most part, complete case notes during my pedicures. And I call that self-stewardship because it forces me to sit in a chair for an hour and I can just type away on my phone while the technician does all the work. And I warn them that I will kick them if they are not sensitive with my feet. So for me, things that social media has dubbed as self-care, um, those things may not work for me, right? Because of one reason or another. And it's something that I know, but I continue to go into this space because it helps me, A, just sit and do case notes, quite honestly. I'm paying somebody to monitor me as I complete my work. Um, and I get pretty toes at the end of it, right? So that is one way that I balance self-care with self-stewardship. Um, I find self-care to be just sitting with my family and doing nothing, right? That to me is wonderful. And that's if I was going to ask myself what's working, what the question is, I would say, or I would answer that with just sitting with my family, playing a card game, would be what is working for myself. Again, something very intimate, not a huge party, and something that I can very easily get out of if I feel overwhelmed or recharged. Um, Second piece, or the third piece of this, actually, it is what is missing. Are there any personal or professional areas where you would like more support? I think this is super, super crucial about self-care. Dr. C came up to me once and said, "Hey, Inessa, I noticed that you were struggling to complete your notes." And it took me quite a bit to be like, "Yes, Dr. C, I think I need some help." Um, and so he and I have set up some time to say, okay, um, we're going to put aside some time where you and I can just, bang them out. And that has been a part of um, the self stewardship piece, right? So that when I do come home, I can mentally turn off and then engage in self care because, oh, look, maybe I haven't completed all my case notes, but I feel like I've done a good portion and that allows me to put work aside and away, right? So, again, that balance between self care and self stewardship. Knowing your weaknesses and why you struggle with those and finding other people to help you manage is quite important. I am, I disclosed previously, I am somebody who has ADHD, so body doubling is a wonderful tool that I like to use in order to do something similar, i.e., get a pedicure. I've also actually paid my sister to sit next to me and just make sure that I am being productive, right? She's doing her homework, I'm writing my own case notes. Again, is that self care? No. Is it self stewardship? Yes. So that then I can engage in self care. And this takes a lot of uh, just reflection to know your weakness, right? Like nobody wants to admit that they struggle with this certain area. I certainly didn't want to. But if I don't acknowledge that, then it just ends up being something a lot bigger than I can't deal with on my own. Um, I think I answered the what can I change question, right? What are the maladaptive coping strategies? It might be isolation. It might be um, lack of sleep. It
Eating.
might be avoidance. It could be anything, right? Weed, alcohol, all of the above. And then what do you do or don't do or what can you control in your personal slash professional environment? Okay, creating a self-care plan. So writing a list of challenges, demands, difficulties, and stressors in your life, including, something as simple as I have a hard time getting my notes done, right? That is a challenge. I don't know why it's a challenge. For some people, it might be a different challenge. And then a list of resources that can be of use to coping. And this is where self-care starts to look different for every single person. Self-care is not what it is dubbed or celebrated on social media, right? What somebody's version of self-care is on social media may not be your own. Um, so starting with writing out what self-care activities you presently are using. I bet you'd be surprised that you're engaging in self-care activities that you didn't know were actually self-care, and we will get into those a little bit later. And then constructing a time budget of the week. And I put here operating at around 80% capacity because if you're anything like me and have time blindness, you schedule in self-care, but then realize, oh my gosh, this other place in my life is a fire right now and I need to put it out. Um, so allowing wiggle room in your schedule, I think, is also part of self-care. Okay, so this is a ChatGPT quick Google search of self-care techniques, of low-cost self-care that anyone can engage in. And a lot of my clients say, oh, I don't have money to do self-care. And I always pull this out and say, hey, look, these are things that you can do that cost little to nothing. And of course, they come in different categories. Those categories that we talked about earlier: personal, emotional, spiritual. Some things that I found very interesting about this slide. Let's see. We all know about the mindfulness and the stretching and the journaling and the progressive muscle relaxation, but other things like drawing, coloring, cooking something new, DIY crafts could be self-care. I love this one for more of my anxious types and actually myself when I feel like everything is falling apart. Decluttering a small self or a small space could be considered as self-care. It can give you a sense of control over a situation. Maybe you feel like things are out of your control. So to quickly counteract that, we can either reorganize a shelf, maybe not do laundry because that might be more stressful, but just opening up a box that hasn't been organized in many months or many years, and just slowly working through that. And then spiritual connection, phoning a friend. We can also do watching inspirational content, right? Whatever is inspiring to us. Practicing gratitude is huge. I think it's its own separate topic. And volunteering or helping someone. I can't tell you the number of times that I felt so reset and rejuvenated just by opening my own self up for someone else, or to connect with someone else, or do something for other people. This one's tricky though, because sometimes there's like a difference between, oh, I want to help versus, oh my gosh, helping them is actually so much more overwhelming and daunting, right? So this is where knowing yourself and what you need and in which category of self-care you need it is quite important. Okay, here is something that I found interesting for myself that I want to integrate. So this is me speaking or preaching to myself more so than you folks. But practicing tips for daily integration, and this is so during session, and after care, or aftercare for after I finish the workday. So deep breathing between sessions. This end of day closure routine was something that was very interesting that came up for me when I was doing research on this topic. So I will get into that a little bit in the next slide. And then, of course, limiting after-hour communication. I typically don't have time, or I don't struggle with this. I include my communication about after hours at the very beginning of my relationship with a client so they know what to expect if they need to contact me after hours. Um, and schedule self-care like an appointment. Shoot, I wish I was good at this or better at this, but this is a work in progress for me as well. Okay, so this is something that I came up with for end of day closure routine after sessions. It could look like all of this. It could look like some of this. It can look like a good portion of this or none of it. Whatever helps you transition from work to home, right? Where you can put away work um, without any guilt so that you can step into home and then either engage in or and be present at home and engage in self-care in the evenings or whenever it is that you do self-care. Okay, final thoughts. So self-care is about you. Make it make sense to you. Okay, it's not what social media says. It is what your needs are. And in order to know what you need, you have to sit down and take a really hard look at what your challenges are. How come you're not engaging in self-care? Is there too much on your plate? Where can you use other resources? A part of self-stewardship is saying, maybe we need to hire a housekeeper. All right. A part of self-stewardship can say, somebody needs to help me cook because I can't be cooking all the meals at home and taking care of the children and the finances and everything else that I have happening. Um, Second point is if it's not working, change it. Like we get I at least I got so stuck in a practice that um it was just not working for me. I was doing the self-care, but I didn't feel like it was doing anything. It felt like a to do or another task that I needed to do. Um, and I have stuck with something for too long that didn't work, and it actually ended up making me more resentful. Um, it is okay to use slash include others into your plan for higher success. I think it's absolutely okay to say, hey, come up to your partner and say, hey, can you make sure that we schedule this every single week at some time? Can you, um, can you do this so that I can engage in self-care? Um, Something that I've also come up with as part of being a therapist over the last couple of years is practicing guilt-free self-care takes time. I don't know why this is so hard for us therapists, at least for myself. I feel like I need to always be doing more, and that actually probably signals into things that I can work on in therapy and with parts work. But it um, one of the things that my husband pointed out to me is he's like, I didn't realize you were such a busy bee. Like I knew you were busy, but you're just constantly moving. Um, and so turning off or having a closure routine, that is something that I am personally working on, um, or that I've come across to include in my own self-care. Just I don't know if it'll work or not for me. I may share how my success is with that, but helping me transition from work to home. And then self-care will look different in different seasons. And I mean this to be quite literally the four seasons, but also stages in life. Um, so being mindful of what you need or what is available or what resources you have in each season can look different and it's something to keep in mind. And I believe that is it. Yes.
Wow. Very informative. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Um,
very good, Inessa. Thank you.
Thank you.
A
Any
lot of good
questions
material
or
here.
yeah, any questions or comments?
Um, I can say my self-care routine has changed over the years as I've changed, as my needs have changed. So being willing to notice what's working and what isn't working and update it regularly, my brain, and I think a lot of human brains like newness. And if it starts feeling like a rut, it's time to change, at least for me. So I find myself changing up what I do quite often.
Thank you for validating that, Dr. C. I feel like novelty is one of those things that's maybe it's an ADHD thing. I don't know.
Could
It
be.
actually probably
I'm
is.
ADHD.
Any other comments or maybe things that I missed? Because I certainly am just one um, person, right? Somebody else, like you, Dr. Venn or David, have other suggestions or tips or maybe even things that don't work also to share with us.
Well, thank you, Inessa. Thank you for inviting my input, and I'd be happy to share what I do with self-care, but not while we're recording. You're going to have to shut off the recorder before I get into that.
I will shut off the recorder.